All right, well, we've been dancing around it long enough. I mean, sort of probably the most infamous story to come out of the Wild West was this town of Tombstone and Wyatt Earp. So, what is the story of Tombstone, the shooting at the OK Corral, and why is it so famous?
Well, I think part of the reason it's famous is that it does involve Wyatt Earp, who became a legendary lawman, and we know so much more about Wyatt Earp now than they did 100 years ago or whatever. But yeah, oh yeah, so much more. I mean, but anyway, why it's famous? I mean, it 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 did capture the public's imagination, I should say, in later years. You know, when the gunfight took place, and the gunfight's basically between these two factions. You've got the Earp brothers, who, Virgil Earp is the city marshal, and he deputizes, Wyatt and Morgan and Doc Holliday to help him. He has to go disarm the cowboys who were kind of flaunting themselves, and Ike Clanton was, he was drunk and he was threatening everybody, and this cowboy gang, which Ike Clanton was a member of, and also the McClarys, they had made threats against the Earps for quite a while. And again, it had to do with these posses that were going after the stage robbers and various other things that uh, caused disagreements, caused people that were disgruntled or whatever, and it just came to a head in Tombstone, October 26th, 1881, and as they went to disarm the cowboys, you know, they went around the corner. There's this very small lot, maybe 15 to 20 feet wide, and everybody went for their guns. I mean, Virgil Earp said, you know, we come to disarm you, and automatically they're grabbing guns. And Virgil Earp, raises a cane. It was Doc Holliday's cane. Says, "Hold! I don't want that." But it was too late. I mean, the gunfire erupts almost instantly. But to get back to what I was trying to say earlier, it wasn't this famous thing to start with. I mean, the New York Times had like 3 lines about it, and it had and it had everything was mixed up in the New York Times reporting, and it really didn't get much notice. But over time, especially afterwards, as Wyatt Earp goes on this vendetta ride and is trying to track down. And by the way, Wyatt Earp at that time, we call it a vendetta ride, but he was a U.S. deputy marshal. Um, himself. So he was a lawman and he could deputize others, which he did. So all these men were part of a legal posse. And there was more than one posse because there was also a posse chasing White Earp as well because of the killing that he was doing. But that vendetta ride, I think, is what um, kind of starts this interest and starts to get some attention. And he gets a lot more play in the newspapers as time goes on. And it just kind of represents, I don't know, it represents the wildness of the Wild West. I mean, you have people settling things through a 6 gun. Um, and yes, it becomes iconic. But what really takes off this story, and I guess we could call it legend, is a 1931 biography of Wyatt Earp by Stuart Lake called Frontier Marshal, and it's a very glowing account of Wyatt Earp and the episodes, the events of his life, and what leads up to, and of course, an account of the OK Corral. And you've got this really colorful character named Doc Holliday, who's Wyatt Earp's best buddy at this time, and it's just the stuff of romance and legend, really. And that book spawns movies. It spawns a TV show, Wyatt Earp, that was very popular in the late 1950s. I think Hugh O'Brien was the guy that played Wyatt Earp. So it you know it took, as with many things, it took a book to create this wide interest. The same thing happened with Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was not a hugely known Western figure, until a book in 1926 called The Saga of Billy the Kid by Walter Noble Burns. It was one of the earliest Book of the Month Club selections, and it spawned a movie in 1930. And there's been several movies, of course, about Billy the Kid since. So Yeah, so it's very iconic. It's kind of probably the most famous gunfight, and it's really one of the few real gunfights. A lot of gunfights weren't anything like that. They weren't. There wasn't a face-off. I mean, a lot of gunfights were shooting people in the back. John Wesley Hardin got a bullet in the back of the head. There's no way he was going to wait. And Billy the Kid shot in a darkened room. That was not a gunfight at all. But this was one of the few incidents where you actually had these gunfighters facing off, quickly drawing their weapons and blasting away at each other.
Yeah, this is where we start busting up some more myths. So you're telling me that these cool standoffs for, 30 seconds a minute with cool music, those didn't actually happen?
No, not no, they did not. No, I mean, you know, they're trying to kill each other, and so these guys are going to take any advantage they can if they can, take them unawares. There was one incident involving Buckskin Leslie, and I believe it was Billy Claiborne, who is also known as Billy the Kid, and Buckskin Leslie got wind that Billy Claiborne was going to shoot him, and Buckskin Leslie just goes around the back of the building, is kind of waiting near the door for Billy Claiborne to come out, and then he blasts him when he comes out. He murders him. But everybody knew that, hey, Billy Claiborne was threatening Buckskin Leslie, and so he had every right to take him out. But um, this idea of giving your opponent a chance to kill you, that did not happen. Now that did happen with your duels in 19th century, in the pre-Civil War, and the duelists, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Hart Benton, I mean, famous duelists. That you were giving your opponent a fair chance to kill you, but that did not happen in the Wild West. I mean, Pat Garrett said, well, Pat Garrett got upset about the twisting of the truth of how he killed Billy, and he says, people, this story that I was hiding behind a bed or a couch is completely untrue. But he said, had there been a couch to hide behind, I would have been behind it. you know, because he said, Billy had sworn that he was going to kill him next time they saw it. So he wasn't going to give Billy the Kid a chance to kill another sheriff. No. So yeah, that is a huge myth. There's this idea of fairness in a gunfight really did not exist. It's like, you wanted to kill your opponent as quickly as possible and escape injury yourself.
That's no fun. So gunfights and duels aren't necessarily portrayed accurately in movies.
No, not really. Especially the ones with Clint Eastwood and
Yeah,
the good, the bad, and the ugly in those,
those
yeah.
are the best ones, though.
They are, yeah, they're really fun, yeah. With the music too, yeah.
You've alluded to Wyatt Earp's shady, mysterious, and dark past outside of Tombstone. Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, he before he went to Kansas, he was arrested as a horse thief in the Indian Territory, and he escaped a federal jail in Arkansas, and he ends up in Illinois in a town of Peoria, which had its fair share of bordellos or brothels. And according to the records, he was arrested as both is essentially the proprietor as operating a house of ill repute. So he was apparently a pimp in Illinois, and his first his he had several quote wives, common law wives, um, and he was living with a young woman who was a prostitute. So not only was he a pimp, but his woman was a prostitute as well in Peoria, and we have the arrest records to show it's Wyatt Earp. There's no question it was Wyatt, and also his brother Morgan was arrested for the same thing or a similar crime. And we also know that Virgil Earp was in Peoria for a while as well. And they had grown up in Illinois and Iowa, so there's a reason why Wyatt Earp would end up back in Illinois. And of course, Illinois is very far from that federal jail in Arkansas that he escaped from for stealing a horse or horses. So and then his quote wives, he had a second wife. This gets so confusing, Jake, because I'm calling a wife. So he had a wife that he legally married in Lamar, Missouri. I believe it was in 1870. She died of certain disease when she was young and had their first child. So she's out of the picture, and that's how he ends up in Indian Territory. Gets caught as a horse thief. Well, in Peoria, Illinois, He has a wife or significant other who's a prostitute, but there's no legal documentation they were ever married. When he's in Dodge City, he's no longer with that woman from Peoria, but he has a new wife, significant other. Her name is Maddie, and the thing is, in these towns, um, regardless of what their past had been, and Maddie had been a prostitute at one time also, but they have this facade or present this facade of respectability. She's known as Mrs. Earp, and nobody even today, if somebody says this is my wife, Katie. You don't ask to see the marriage certificate, right? You just take my word for it. So that's what happened in these towns. So, she's Mrs. Earp and referred to as Mrs. Earp. But they were never legally married. We have no documentation of that. Well, when they get to Tombstone, um, Wyatt becomes infatuated with the county sheriff's lover, who was a woman named Sadie, and he essentially just stops seeing or having anything to do with Maddie and dumps her. And that's another thing behind this OK Corral gunfight and the animosity. Sheriff Bean, uh, he favored the Cowboys. But then Wyatt's kind of takes his woman, and so there's this animosity between Bean and you probably saw this in the movie Tombstone you watched as well. So yeah, but so anyway, so Wyatt has at least four different women in his life, and Maddie, who's living in Tombstone as Mrs. Earp, um, she goes to California, and it's for a short time. Maddie is with Wyatt's parents, but he apparently never sees her again. And Maddie ends up committing suicide a few years later, and she is quoted in the coroner's inquest testimony. Someone knew her says she says Wyatt Earp ruined my life. She blamed all her troubles on him. I mean, she had no income. She may have gone back to prostitution, but it was some kind of overdose. But they believe it was suicide, and how much a fault that is of Wyatt, but certainly from her perspective, he was a mean and cruel person and abandoned her for this other woman, who was also Sadie had also been a prostitute at one time as well.
Wow, so he was quite the playboy himself, Mr. Wyatt.
He was a ladies' man. So was Sheriff Bean as well, because his wife divorced him because he had gone to the prostitute Sadie, who was working out of a brothel in Prescott, Arizona. So yes, it was a twisted web that they were weaving there amongst the ladies.
That very twisted web. I guess it's an age-old tale of the women getting in between the men and the men fighting over it. But to me, the star of the show of Tombstone was Doc Holliday. I mean, maybe it was just Val Kilmer's charisma, but he was such a smooth operator. He was so cool to watch. What was his story? Because I mean, this was like a dentist.
Yes, well, there's an unspoken rule. I was told this by somebody, but the rule is that in any kind of OK Corral movie, Doc Holliday steals the show. So in the Kevin Costner Wyatt Earp, Dennis Quaid steal. I mean, he's the character that steals the show. In Tombstone, it's Val Kilmer. Well, in the gunfight at the OK Corral with Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas is Doc Holliday. He steals the show. I mean, he's the character. Yes, he was trained as a dentist. He actually had a degree in dentistry. He had a partner in Texas, in Dallas, and they entered this fair competition and actually won awards for their dentistry. So in his early 20s, Doc Holliday was an award-winning dentist. Um, but also, it's true, as you saw in the movie, he was stricken with tuberculosis. He was a heavy drinker. Now, was the drinking because of his illness? Maybe. But from all accounts, when he drank, he was not a pleasant person. He was easily excitable, argumentative, and he would get into gunfights with people when he was drinking. But on the other hand, he was a lot like Wyatt Earp, except for the drinking part. Wyatt Earp actually is not known to have been a drinker. We can't say he never drank. I think Stuart Lake tried to make it seem like the biography. He tried to make it seem like Wyatt, was a teetotaler. But No, why? We don't know that. He certainly, he worked in saloons. He was a card dealer, and he had a partnership in a gambling establishment there in Tombstone. So you're around liquor, so I can't imagine he wouldn't have a drink or two. But anyway, but both men were described as being quiet, reserved, and and in that way, and very respectful. And in that way, Wyatt and Doc were a lot alike. The difference between the two was the drinking. And when Doc drank, he got in trouble. And from one account says the Earp brothers, whenever Doc got out of control, they were always the one kind of pulling him away and trying to take care of him like a wayward brother, essentially. But yeah, Doc Holliday is this just amazing character, and he's from Georgia, uh, and he eventually dies from tuberculosis. I believe it was 1889 in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and he's penniless. He really has nothing at the end.
Yeah, he really was a smooth. That's so funny that sort of the unwritten rule of telling the story of Tombstone is Doc Holliday steals the show. I guess I really fell for that trope.
Yeah, well, the thing is that it is fascinating, this friendship between the two. Um, and my book that's coming out a year from now is called Brothers of the Gun: Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and a Reckoning in Tombstone. And it's a dual biography. I still tell both their stories and focus on their friendship. But that started. A lot of people don't know. They know they were friends They know that from the movies. They don't know how it started. But Doc Holliday saved Wyatt's life in Dodge City. Dodge City was, I mean, Wyatt Earp was surrounded by a good number of cowboys who were going to get even with Wyatt. And Doc Holliday, according to the story Wyatt told, Doc saw through the window. He was playing cards inside this saloon, and he saw Wyatt's predicament, and he came out, guns drawn, and got him to back down, and Wyatt got his gun out and arrested him. And but Wyatt always said, and he even testified to this because this question came up in the hearing after the OK Corral about their relationship. And he says, Doc Holliday saved my life in Dodge City. I mean, he always said that more than once, that's where our friendship began. Because they had met before then, they'd met in Texas. But that one moment of heroism from Doc Holliday, that cemented that bond. And it remained there until Doc died in Glenwood Springs.
That is so cool. I mean, it seems like they're very different. I mean, just from my understanding from the movie, it seems like they're very different characters, but they have this unbreakable bond. Seems that, judging by what you said, Wyatt probably felt like he was indebted to him a little bit.
It could be, yeah. I mean, it could be felt like, um, you know, I don't. I've never had somebody save my life, but yeah, you're trying to, put yourself inside their head, and even when they have squabbles or disputes, you probably would always think back. But if I wouldn't be here, if Doc had not come out, so I think you could put up with a lot of problems